The courtroom echoed with his laughter. Not loud, not careless, confident. The kind of laugh that comes from a man who believes the game is already over. Ethan Cole leaned back in his chair, straightening the cuff of his tailored suit, as his lawyer whispered something reassuring. The papers were signed, the terms were agreed upon, the divorce was finished in everything but the final word. Across the room, his wife sat in complete silence. No tears, no arguments, no anger, just stillness. Everyone in the courtroom thought the same thing. She had lost. No one noticed the older man sitting quietly in the second row of the gallery. Silver hair, calm eyes, no expression of urgency, just presence. And no one realized that the true power in that room didn't sit at the judge's bench. It sat right behind her. Before the story continues, a small request. If you enjoy powerful courtroom stories where arrogance turns into regret and silence becomes strength, make sure to subscribe to the channel now, because this story isn't just about a divorce, it's about a man who bragged too early, and a father whose final move silenced an entire courtroom. Now let's begin. Ethan Cole believed this divorce was a victory. To him, the marriage had become an inconvenience, something that no longer fit the life he wanted to live, or the image he wanted the world to see. Success, control, freedom. Serving the divorce papers had been easy. Sitting in court now, he felt untouchable. His lawyer stood with confidence. "Your Honor," he said, "my client provided everything in this marriage, the home, the income, the lifestyle. Mrs. Cole has no independent assets and no financial contribution that would justify further claims." Ethan smiled. He glanced toward his wife. She didn't look up. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry, no makeup. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. Her face showed no emotion, not sadness, not anger, just patience. For 3 days she hadn't said a single word. When her character was questioned, she stayed silent. When her role in the marriage was reduced to dependency, she stayed silent. When Ethan's lawyer implied she was lucky to receive anything at all, she stayed silent. Whispers filled the gallery. "She's given up. She knows she can't win. This is over." Ethan leaned toward his lawyer and muttered with a faint smile, "She didn't even try." The lawyer nodded. Silence is acceptance. But Ethan misunderstood one critical thing. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was timing. The judge adjusted his glasses and closed the file. The room grew heavy with anticipation. "Mrs. Cole," the judge said, "you've remained silent throughout these proceedings. Do you have anything you wish to say before the court issues its final decision?" This was the moment people expected: tears, apologies, a breakdown. Instead, she stood, slowly, calmly. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "but not for myself." Ethan raised an eyebrow, amused. The judge leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" She didn't look at Ethan. She turned toward the gallery. "My father is present," she said, "and he has something the court needs to see." A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Ethan let out a soft laugh. "This is divorce court," he said casually. "Not a family reunion." The judge's gaze shifted. "Sir?" the judge asked. The man in the gallery stood, unhurried, composed. He walked forward holding a thin leather folder. "I won't take much of the court's time," he said calmly, "but my daughter deserves the truth to be on record." Ethan's smile tightened. For the first time, he noticed how the room responded to this man. The lawyers straightened, the clerk paused, even the judge's posture changed. The man placed the folder on the bench. "These documents," he said, "clarify who truly owns the assets my daughter is being asked to walk away from." Ethan's heart skipped. "That's not possible," he said quickly. "Everything is in my name." The man looked directly at him. "Names," he said evenly, "and ownership are not the same thing." The judge opened the folder. As his eyes scanned the first page, his expression changed. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. The laughter was gone. Ethan swallowed hard, because in that moment he understood something he never had before. He hadn't won the divorce. He had just underestimated the wrong man. The judge didn't speak immediately. He stared at the document in front of him, then slowly removed his glasses. The courtroom felt heavier than before, as if the air itself had thickened. Ethan noticed it instantly. Something had changed. "What is this?" the judge finally asked, his voice calm but sharp. The older man answered without hesitation, "My late will." Ethan frowned. "Your will?" he scoffed. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this has nothing to do with our divorce." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Let me decide that," he said. He flipped to the next page, and then the next. Each second stretched longer than the last. Ethan's confidence began to crack. The man stood quietly beside the bench, hands folded behind his back. He didn't rush, he didn't explain. He let the paper do the talking. Finally, the judge looked up. "Mr. Cole," he said slowly, "are you aware that the primary assets listed under your name were transferred into a family trust 12 years ago?" Ethan's smile vanished. "That's impossible," he said. "I built everything myself." The man spoke again, calm and measured. "You built the company," he said. "You did not fund it." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ethan turned toward his lawyer. What is he talking about? His lawyer's face had gone pale. The judge continued reading. According to these documents, the judge said, the trust was established by Mr. Jonathan Hale, with Mrs. Cole listed as the sole beneficiary. Ethan froze. Jonathan Hale. He knew that name, or at least he thought he did. "That can't be right," Ethan said, standing halfway out of his seat. "Her father had nothing to do with my business." Jonathan finally turned his eyes toward him. "You never asked," he said simply. The courtroom fell silent again. Jonathan's voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "When you married my daughter," he continued, "you were struggling. You had an idea, not a company. You needed capital, discretion, patience." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "You think I don't remember?" Jonathan went on. "The nights you borrowed, the meetings you didn't attend because you couldn't afford the flight, the loans you thought were anonymous." Ethan shook his head. "No, that's not. You never questioned why the money always arrived on time," Jonathan said, "or why no investor ever interfered." The judge raised his eyes. "Mr. Hale," he said, "are you stating that you financed Mr. Cole's company through this trust?" Jonathan nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." Ethan's lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we were never informed." "You were never curious," Jonathan replied calmly. Ethan turned toward his wife. For the first time in 3 days, she looked directly at him. Not with anger, not with triumph, with something worse, clarity. "You knew?" Ethan asked her, his voice cracking. "You knew all this time?" She answered softly. "I knew who my father was." The judge leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Cole," he said, "this trust places the majority control of your company under Mrs. Cole's ownership." Ethan's breath caught. "That's not possible," he whispered. "I'm the CEO." Jonathan spoke again. "Titles are temporary," he said. "Ownership is not." The judge closed the file. "Court will take a brief recess," he announced. The gavel struck. Ethan sat frozen. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to someone else. Across from him, his wife remained seated, calm as ever. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't defended herself. She had simply waited. And now, the man who thought he had won the divorce was beginning to understand something terrifying. The real battle hadn't started until now. The courtroom doors closed behind the judge, and the room erupted into low murmurs. Ethan remained seated, staring at the table in front of him as if the wood might offer answers. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered to his lawyer. "Fix it." But his lawyer didn't respond immediately. He was rereading the documents Jonathan Hale had submitted, his hands slightly unsteady. "This trust," the lawyer finally said, lowering his voice, "it's airtight." Ethan snapped his head up. "What do you mean airtight?" "I mean," the lawyer swallowed, "it was created long before the marriage, long before the company took off. Everything was done legally." Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Across the room, his wife sat quietly. She hadn't moved. Jonathan stood beside her, his posture relaxed, almost casual, as if this were not a courtroom, but a long-delayed conversation finally reaching its conclusion. Ethan pushed back his chair and stood. "You planned this," he said, his voice sharp. "Both of you." His wife looked at him calmly. "No," she replied. "You did." Ethan laughed. But it sounded hollow. I married you. I built a life with you. Jonathan stepped forward, his tone steady. You married my daughter, he said, and assumed silence meant ignorance. Ethan's jaw tightened. She never said anything, he snapped. She never mentioned a trust, never mentioned you. Jonathan nodded. She asked me not to. Ethan turned to her again. Why? He demanded. Why hide it? She took a slow breath. Because I wanted to know who you were without it. The words landed harder than any accusation. You wanted to test me, Ethan scoffed. No, she said quietly. I wanted to trust you. For a moment, no one spoke. Ethan felt the weight of every decision he had made begin to press down on him. The judge returned, taking his seat. Let's proceed, he said. He looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Cole, based on the trust documents, it appears that the assets in question are not solely yours. Ethan's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, even if the trust exists, my client managed the company. Jonathan nodded, and he was paid generously for it. The judge raised an eyebrow. Paid? Jonathan opened another folder. Executive compensation, he said. Bonuses. Shares awarded conditionally, all clearly outlined. The judge scanned the page. These shares, he said, revert to the trust in the event of marital misconduct. Ethan's heart pounded. What misconduct? He snapped. The judge looked up. Adultery. The word echoed through the room. Ethan's lawyer froze. The judge turned another page. Hotel records, corporate card statements, dates aligning with your separation. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Jonathan spoke calmly. You thought the divorce was clean, he said. But you forgot one thing. Ethan swallowed. You signed everything. The judge closed the file slowly. Mr. Cole, he said, the court will need tea. I may to reassess asset division. Ethan's confidence was gone. For the first time he felt exposed. Not attacked. Exposed. Across the room his wife still said nothing. She didn't need to. The truth was speaking for her now. Ethan's lawyer leaned closer to him, his voice barely above a whisper. This is getting out of control, he said. You need to stay calm. Ethan didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the documents spread across the bench, on the judge's measured movements, on the man he had underestimated. So badly. Jonathan Hale stood quietly, hands clasped behind his back, watching without expression. He wasn't enjoying this. He wasn't gloating. He was correcting a mistake. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, he said, I need to ask you directly. Were you aware of the clauses tied to the trust? Ethan swallowed hard. No, he said, forcing the word out. I wasn't. Jonathan's eyes flicked toward him. You were, he said calmly. You just didn't read what you signed. Ethan turned sharply. That's a lie. Jonathan didn't raise his voice. You signed the operating agreement 6 months after the wedding, he continued. You were in a hurry. You trusted the numbers more than the details. The judge looked down again. He's correct, he said. Your signature appears here. Ethan stared at the page. He remembered that day. The late meeting, the exhaustion, the confidence that nothing could touch him. He had signed without reading. The judge folded his hands. Mr. Cole, he said, your compensation, bonuses, and conditional shares were tied to marital conduct. This was clearly disclosed. Ethan felt something break inside him. So what happens now? He asked quietly. Jonathan answered before the judge could. Now, he said, you stop pretending this was ever yours alone. Ethan's lawyer stood again, desperate. Your Honor, even I. If ownership changes, my client is still entitled to a fair settlement. The judge nodded slowly. Fair, he said, is exactly what this court intends. He looked toward Ethan's wife. Mrs. Cole, he said. Would you like to speak? For the first time she hesitated. Then she stood. The room leaned toward her. I didn't want this, she said softly. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to embarrass him. Ethan looked at her. I wanted the truth, she continued, and I wanted it to matter. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. The judge nodded. Court will recess until tomorrow, he said. This case is far from concluded. The gavel struck. Ethan sat back, numb. The victory he had bragged about was gone. In its place was something worse. Uncertainty. As the room emptied, Jonathan leaned toward him. "You laughed too early," he said quietly. And for the first time since the proceedings began, Ethan had nothing to say. That night, Ethan barely slept. The silence of his apartment felt heavier than the courtroom ever had. Every sound echoed. Every thought circled back to the same realization. He had underestimated them, not just Jonathan Hale, but the woman he had once called his wife. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. Less noise, less confidence. Ethan arrived early, his posture tense, his jaw clenched. The familiar arrogance was gone, replaced by calculation. He needed a way out. Across the room, his wife entered quietly, followed by Jonathan. They spoke softly to one another, not about strategy, not about money, but about timing. That unsettled Ethan more than anything else. The judge took his seat. "Let's continue," he said. Ethan's lawyer stood. "Your Honor," he began, "my client is prepared to negotiate a revised settlement." Jonathan looked up, mildly curious. "Negotiate," he repeated. "For what?" Ethan leaned forward. "I don't want this to become ugly," he said. "We can end this respectfully." His wife met his eyes. "Respectfully?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "You filed for divorce while my mother was in the hospital," she said calmly. "You called me a liability. You laughed in this courtroom." The words stung because they were true. Jonathan spoke next. "We didn't come here to negotiate," he said. "We came to clarify." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Jonathan handed over another document. "This outlines the secondary clause of the trust," he said. "In the event of public misrepresentation or financial misconduct, control is transferred immediately." Ethan's lawyer stiffened. "Misconduct?" he asked. "There has been no ruling." The judge raised a hand. "There has been evidence," he said. He looked at Ethan. "Corporate funds used for personal expenses. Undisclosed accounts. Breach of fiduciary duty." Ethan's mouth went dry. Jonathan continued calmly. "You bragged about winning the divorce," he said. "Publicly. Interviews. Statements to investors." Ethan remembered them now. The headlines, the quotes. The judge closed the file. "Mr. Cole," he said, "the court is ordering a full audit." The word hit like a hammer. An audit meant exposure. Ethan leaned back, defeated. Across from him, his wife didn't smile. She simply exhaled. Because this was never about punishment. It was about accountability. And Ethan was finally running out of places to hide. The word audit didn't just hang in the air. It crushed it. Ethan felt his chest tighten as if the courtroom walls had moved closer. An audit wasn't just paperwork. It was exposure. It meant strangers digging through years of transactions, emails, signatures, decisions he had made without thinking anyone would ever question them. He looked at his lawyer. The man avoided his eyes, for the first time since the div. Divorce proceedings began. Ethan understood something terrifying. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about survival. The judge leaned back slightly, his tone firm but controlled. "Mr. Cole, this audit will determine whether the assets in question were handled in good faith. Until then, all transfers are frozen." Frozen. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Across the room, his wife remained still. Her face showed no satisfaction, no revenge, just quiet resolve, as if this moment had always been inevitable. Jonathan Hale placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I am now." Those words cut deeper than any legal ruling. The court adjourned for the day, but the war didn't pause. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered instantly, cameras flashing, questions flying. "Mr. Cole, is it true your company is under audit? Are the allegations of misconduct accurate?" Ethan said nothing. For the first time in his life, silence wasn't a choice. It was all he had left. That night, alone in his apartment, Ethan stared at the city skyline. Once those lights had made him feel powerful, untouchable. Now they felt cold. His phone buzzed, a message from the board. "We need to talk." Another buzz. From the bank. Your request has been denied. He sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. The audit hadn't even begun, and already doors were closing. Across the city, in a quiet hotel room, Jonathan sat at a small table, reviewing documents. His daughter watched him. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. He looked up at her. "Yes, I did." She frowned. "I never asked for revenge." Jonathan shook his head. "This isn't revenge," he said. "It's correction. You stayed silent long enough. I won't." The next morning, the audit officially began. Accountants arrived at Ethan's company, MP&E headquarters. Files were requested. Emails were flagged. Transactions questioned. The board called an emergency meeting. Ethan walked into the room feeling smaller than he ever had. "This is temporary," he said quickly. "It'll blow over." No one responded. One board member finally spoke. "You said this divorce was clean," she said. "You said there were no complications." Ethan didn't answer. Another member leaned forward. "Were you aware the trust could reclaim controlling interest?" Ethan hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The board voted. Ethan was placed on administrative leave. By the time he returned home, the news was everywhere. Stock fluctuations, investor concern, legal uncertainty. He sat alone in his living room, watching his own downfall play out on television. Meanwhile, the audit uncovered what Ethan had hoped would remain buried. Personal expenses charged to corporate accounts, undisclosed transfers, misrepresented statements. Each discovery chipped away at the image he had built. And through it all, his wife said nothing publicly. No interviews, no statements, no victory speeches. Her silence spoke louder than any accusation. The judge reviewed the preliminary findings carefully. "This is no longer a simple divorce matter," he said in court. "This is about accountability." Ethan stood there, pale, exhausted. No trace of the man who had laughed weeks earlier. He glanced once at his wife. She didn't look away. She didn't glare. She simply watched, and for the first time, Ethan understood that the most dangerous opponent was not someone who attacked, but someone who waited. The final hearing was nothing like the first. There was no laughter, no confidence, only tension. Ethan stood before the judge, shoulders slumped, hands clasped tightly. The audit's conclusions lay in a thick file on the bench. The judge ined it slowly. "Mr. Cole," he said, "the findings are clear." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "You misused corporate funds, misrepresented ownership, and violated the trust agreement you signed." The words landed like verdicts. The judge continued. "As a result, the court recognizes the trust's full authority over the assets in question." Ethan's lawyer didn't stand. He had nothing left to say. The judge turned toward Ethan's wife. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "the court acknowledges your restraint throughout these proceedings." She nodded politely. "The assets revert to the trust under your name," the judge concluded. "The divorce is finalized under revised terms." The gavel struck. It was over. Ethan felt the weight of it settle completely. As the courtroom emptied, he remained standing, unsure where to go next. Jonathan approached him quietly. "You laughed because you thought power was loud," he said. "You were wrong." Ethan looked up at him. "I didn't know," he said weakly. Jonathan met his gaze. "You didn't want to." Across the room, his daughter waited. Jonathan turned and walked away. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. His daughter stepped into the sunlight, breathing deeply. "It's done," she said. Jonathan nodded. "And now," he replied, "you move forward." She looked back at the courthouse one last time, not with bitterness, with clarity, because she hadn't won by shouting. She hadn't won by fighting. She had won by knowing when to stay silent and when to let the truth speak. Ethan watched them leave, alone in the crowd, finally understanding the cost of underestimating the wrong people. The divorce had ended, but the lesson would last forever.